Szanowni Państwo, niniejszy film powstał w celu uporządkowania historii europejskiego federalizmu i ma charakter uzupełniający do działalności pana Krzysztofa Karonia. Miałem przyjemność korespondować z panem Krzysztofem Karoniem, jednak nie zdążyłem przekazać mu materiałów zebranych przeze mnie. Robię to teraz, udostępniając historię federalizmu szerszej publiczności. Film jest dość długi, ale umieściłem w nim najważniejsze wydarzenia związane z europejskim federalizmem. Spróbuję odpowiedzieć na pytanie, dlaczego flagi Unii Europejskiej na Ventotene są czerwone. Współcześnie ludzie nie czytają programów politycznych. To duży błąd. Zapraszam do oglądania.
But we know we will need more, a lot more, because this will be a long haul and the world of tomorrow will look very different than that of yesterday. Honorable members, I am convinced that Europe can shape this new world if it works together and rediscovers its pioneering spirit. And for this, I want to cite a sentence from the Ventotene Manifesto, written by two of Italy's and Europe's greatest visionaries, Ernesto Rossi and ALTIERO Spinelli, one of our founding fathers, writing from their prison on a remote island at the height of the war, when all hope of a united Europe seemed lost. They gave us these words of confidence. The moment has arrived in which we must know how to discard old burdens, how to be ready for the new world that is coming, that will be so different from what we have imagined. Dear friends, this moment has arrived once again. The moment to put behind us the old divisions, disputes, and recriminations, to come out of our entrenched positions. The moment to be ready for that new world, to use all the power and our common spirit and the strength of our shared purposes. The starting point for this must be making our economies, societies, and way of life more sustainable and resilient. Find the answers in this new world will require courage, trust, and solidarity. And it will need massive investment to jumpstart our economies. We need a Marshall Plan for Europe's recovery, and it needs to be put in place immediately. There's only one instrument we have that is trusted by all member states, which is already in place, that can deliver quickly, it is transparent, and it is time-tested as an instrument for cohesion, convergence, and investment. And that is the European budget. The European budget will be the mothership of our recovery. And for that reason, the next 7-year budget must be different to what we have imagined, just as Spinelli said. We will use the power of the whole European budget
We now vote on the resolution as a whole by roll call. I open the vote.
In 2022, MEPs voted on a resolution on the revision of EU treaties inspired by citizens' ideas.
And it is adopted.
MEPs of the Spinelli Group had been advocating for this for a long time, following in the footsteps of Altiero Spinelli and his Manifesto di Ventotene. Spinelli was an Italian politician and journalist. When he was 17 years old, he joined the Communist Party, for which he was placed under house arrest by the Italian fascist regime on the island of Ventotene between 1927 and 1943. From here, Spinelli, with the help of Ernesto Rossi, Eugenio Colorni, Ursula Hirschman, and Ada Rossi, drafted a document known as Il Manifesto di Ventotene. In times of war, the manifesto advocated for a federal Europe to overcome conflicts between nation-states. Ursula Hirschman and Ada Rossi brought the manifesto to the continent, transcribed on cigarette papers hidden in pillowcases. Once smuggled to the mainland, the women edited, distributed, and translated the text. After his release in 1943, Altiero Spinelli was involved in founding the Italian Movimento Federalista Europeo and took part in the 1948 Congress of Europe. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, he was a leading activist involved with the 1954 European Political Community Initiative and the Congress of the European People Movement to create a European federal constitution. Spinelli was elected to the European Parliament in 1979. Together with a cross-party group of MEPs, the Crocodile Club, named after the restaurant in Strasbourg where they met, he worked to build a federal Europe strongly connected to its citizens. In the early 1980s, Spinelli, as rapporteur of the newly established Committee on Institutional Affairs, drew up a draft treaty establishing a European Union.
Und Subsidiarität hat etwas damit zu tun. Mit Spinelli konnte man nur ein gutes Verhältnis haben. Nein, er war ja ein fantastischer Mensch und auch in der Art, wie er redete. Also das war schon beeindruckend. Auch mich beeindruckend.
Vous connaissez tous le petit roman de Hemingway où il parle d'un vieux pêcheur qui pêche le plus grand poisson de sa vie.
Das war eine tolle Rede und er sah so auch, der Spinelli mit kahlem Kopf und eisgrauem Bart und so weiter. Also er sah selber aus wie der alte Mann.
Monsieur le Président, le Parlement, par le vote qu'il va donner dans quelques minutes, aura pris le plus grand poisson de sa vie. Et il doit le porter encore dans le port. Mais faisons bien attention, parce que des requins seront à tout moment là pour tâcher de le dévorer. Tâchons de ne pas arriver seulement avec une arête.
The draft treaty, also known as the Spinelli Plan, introduced fundamental concepts for the Union, from codecision to the principle of subsidiarity, the establishment of the single market and European Union citizenship.
Les affaires d'intérêt commun ne peuvent être valablement gérées que par un pouvoir véritablement commun.
The treaty was adopted by the European Parliament in 1984. The draft treaty provided a basis for the Single European Act of 1986 and for the Maastricht Treaty of 1992, forming the European Union.
We have an agreement that also in the next period of the legislative cycle from 24 to 20.
We are here in the European Parliament. If there is today European Parliament with the full powers as we have today, it's because of Altiero Spinelli, because he was the first to come forward with the idea that a European Union is good, but the European Union without a parliamentary democracy elected by the people is nothing at all.
Altiero Spinelli died on the 23rd of May 1986, but his legacy and vision are still being carried forward at the European Parliament. Inspired by the spirit of Ventotene, the Spinelli Group was created in 2010.
The purpose of the Spinelli Group is to continue the legacy of Altiero Spinelli. Altiero Spinelli believed that a peaceful future for this continent is only possible with a federalist European Union.
In 2022, the proposal of a manifesto for a federal Europe, sovereign, social and ecological, was born. a year after the 80th anniversary of the Ventotene Manifesto.
The world has changed, so there was a need to have a new manifesto based on the same ideas, the same spirit as the spirit that you can find by Altiero Spinelli in the original manifesto of Ventotene. And that became the new manifesto.
Together, 23 drafters and 60 supporters set proposals inspired by the original manifesto for today's Europe. After its first presentation in March 2022, MEPs and Federalist activists discussed the manifesto on the island of Ventotene in August 2022. Following the 2022 resolution on treaty reform, the group has worked to bring a file through the European Parliament with measures designed to make the Union able to act faster and be closer to citizens. Ready for the challenges of today and of tomorrow, from climate change to the protection of fundamental rights. In 2021, one of the few remaining original copies of the Ventotene Manifesto was restored by the Historical Archives of the European Union. Ensuring the long-term preservation of this historically significant document of European federalism, the manifesto is kept here in Florence. The Archives of the European Parliament now keeps the modern proposal for a manifesto. Through this, the living memory of Spinelli and the history and making of European federalism will be preserved for future generations.
This is the coast of Ventotene, a little island hardly 1 square mile in the Mediterranean Sea, 15 miles from the Italian mainland, beyond the Gulf of Gaeta. Under Roman domination, Ventotene had a time of prosperity due to the voluntary stay or exile of notorious people such as Julia, daughter of Augustus Caesar.
The Borboni of Naples turned it into a penal colony in the 18th century, and after hundreds of years of pirate incursions, Ventotene became, around 1930, an island of exile, of forced residence for the political opponents of the fascist regime.
Ventotene is now a much appreciated tourist center, but it's also the ALTIERO Spinelli headquarters of the Institute of Federalist Studies. And every year in September, more than 200 young people from all over Europe meet here for a few days of debate and study on European Union, federalism, and international democracy.
From Belgium, I'm coming. Yes. And I hope to learn a lot about federalism and how to realize it in Europe.
We shall hold meetings and conferences. There will be debates on the creation of a government for Europe.
After 10 years spent in fascist prisons, Altiero Spinelli landed in Ventotene in July 1939. 2 months later, the Second World War broke out.
In our forced residence, it was as if we were in the audience in a theater from which we saw what was happening all over Europe. So we were witnessing the progressive collapse of the whole of Europe, except England, under the force of Hitler's attacks. A totally different type of war to what the First World War had been, during which every state had been able to fend for itself. This time they were crushed, and the nation that crushed them, the Germans, were in the end crushed most of all. The old European system had fallen to pieces. The idea that a European federation should be created was well known. Rosselli had said it, and many others as well. However, having said it, they would turn to do something else, as they thought that the creation of a united Europe would happen by itself, by an act of God. Since Ernesto Rossi could correspond with Einaudi, we were able to get some publications of the British Federalists. There was a Federalist movement led by a Lord Lothian, intellectually speaking, an excellent effort. We started to see that someone else had been seriously thinking of the problem of European unity, and we came to the conclusion that the only battle worth fighting was this one. So we wrote this manifesto. It was based on two main concepts. First, European federation is not something that will inevitably occur because it's a logical next step. It is something instead that men must fight for and achieve and belongs to our time. The second observation is that the dividing line between the progressive forces and the conservative ones is no longer the traditional one, but lies between those who want to use their power to promote the European construction and those who want to use it to restore the old national system.
Though Spinelli is the first person who clearly sees the need for a specific political struggle for Europe, others within the European resistance had gone along similar roads and had originated federalist projects and organizations.
Among them, we find the students of Christian inspiration in the White Rose movement in Munich, who were beheaded by the Nazi regime for having distributed leaflets requesting a European federation. Jean Moulin, shot by the Nazis in Lyon. Lucio Galimberti, also executed by the Nazi fascists in Italy.
Those whom we may think of as great federalists are generally writers, not politicians. Experts in economics like Einaudi in Italy, Robbins and Lothian in Great Britain, etc. Spinelli is the first to embody federalism as an action project. Since 1941, Spinelli is conscious that the traditional ideologies had been superseded, and federalism became a principle of global political action, going beyond the concept of federalism as a technical tool to describe a way to organize a state.
Spinelli and other Ventotene residents were liberated in August of 1943, soon after Mussolini's fall. 8 days after his return to the Italian mainland, Spinelli founded the European Federalist movement in Milan, in Mario Alberto Rollier's house.
Rossi e Spinelli decisero di espatriare.
Rossi and Spinelli decided to move to Switzerland to look for the federalist elements in the different resistance movements. I was there too, in Zurich, where I was in charge of the movement in the German-speaking zone of Switzerland. While I came back to Italy, Spinelli went to France. Paris had already been liberated, and contacted the French federalists who had also been part of the resistance movement.
May 1945, the war is over. Unemployment and other major difficulties and social disorders shook the European countries. But soon the United States and Russia would intervene and help in the reconstruction of the old system, thereby contradicting Spinelli's expectations. Nevertheless, this system, based on the old borders, only appeared to be solid. Its basic fragility soon showed up, forcing governments to look for some other form of inter-European cooperation.
In September 1946 in Zurich, Churchill already suggested a vague formula for European confederation.
In the meantime, the Federalists got organized and started acting.
We, of course, after all that had occurred during the war with the French, we wanted to symbolize the brotherhood of the two countries. Together with the Federalists of Menton and Nice, we organized a meeting at the border, which nonetheless had not been foreseen by the customs officers, and we had to break through their barriers to be able to embrace each other between the two frontiers.
The governments also started to move. The need for full use of German resources pushed Jean Monnet, a great federalist, into persuading the French government to create the Coal and Steel Community. The CECA, which includes France, Germany, Belgium, Holland, Italy, and Luxembourg, was born.
De Gasperi declared,
European community means a secure peace between France and Germany. It means a modest but permanent function of Italy within the European concert. It means the opening of a common market of labor and gradual access to the common resources. It means, if not the end, at least the compression of national selfishness and the liberation of popular energies.
Right after the Steel and Coal Treaty was signed, the question arose whether to allow Germany to rearm. The governments couldn't think of any new formula. Quite by chance, the intergovernmental project for a European community of defense ended up in the hands of MFE.
Spinelli pinpointed its contradictions. He explained to De Gasperi that lacking a political unity, a European army would fall under the control of the Americans, thus becoming a body of satellite state troops. De Gasperi read Spinelli's memorandum and came to the conclusion that what was needed was the building up of a European state.
De Gasperi, assisted by Einaudi, won over the resistance of the other governments and was able to create a special assembly to draft a constitution.
The Americans backed the project. Eisenhower visited the MFE headquarters in Rome just before his election to the presidency and stated that a European army was not sufficient. A democratic European state and the Constituent Assembly to found it were badly needed.
On August the 30th, 1954, the CED project was rejected by the French National Assembly. Indomitable nationalists, colonialists, Gaullists, and communists united to defeat the pro-European front by a handful of votes.
In June 1955, the 6th MFE Congress met in Ancona. The debate divided the supporters of a line of collaboration with the government's European policy and the Young Turks, who wanted to go over to the opposition.
Il dibattito fu molto vivo in quell'occasione.
The debate was hectic, but nonetheless ended with an agreement on a new policy for the Federalists, opposition to the government's line towards Europe. We avoided the split that way, which nonetheless occurred a few years later after the congresses of Bolzano and Luxembourg.
Alcuni anni più tardi, a seguito dei congressi di Bolzano e di Lussemburgo.
In che cosa consiste questo nuovo corso?
What is the meaning of the new course? The Federalists acknowledged that the German problem would be solved by the restoration of the German national sovereignty. This took away the opportunity to build Europe with the traditional political tools. They decided to shift to the opposition, which implied the need to call a new caste onto the scene of the European process, the European people, for whom the Federalists claimed constituent powers. The organizational tool they decided to use was the one Gandhi had used in his battle for the independence of India, the Congress. So the Federalists organized the primary elections of the Congress of the European People, the EPC.
The Federalists went into the streets and compelled the Europeans to vote. In Milan, Lyon, Antwerp, Frankfurt, Rome, the European citizens had the opportunity to express their desire for a united Europe. The slogan was, "If you want Europe, vote for it."
It was a big success, but the action was especially important because it demonstrated that it is possible to mobilize the people of Europe in order to achieve political union.
The EPC was in fact the training ground for the last popular demonstrations that the Federalists organized in the 70s and 80s.
While the Federalists fought for the Constituent Assembly, diplomats worked hard to give birth to two new communities, the Economic Community and the Euratom, the treaties of which were signed in Rome in March 1957.
The contradictions within the common market, a neither democratic nor efficient institution, would soon show up, due to the lack of an overall European government and currency.
In the meantime, General de Gaulle came to power in France. Prisoner of the dream of a national past, he was unable to solve the problem of European independence, which he nonetheless invoked.
The Federalists went ahead with their fight against the national governments. On the 14th of July 1965, they broke up the inauguration ceremony of the Mont Blanc Tunnel.
Defying the security services, Sergio Pistone delivered a letter to General de Gaulle and Italian President Saragat with a demand to proceed without delay toward a European federation.
Sergio Pistone, professor at the University of Torino and famous expert on modern history, is still active in the MFE and the UEF, the European organizations which united the various national federalist components. He talks about his experience of those years.
The success of the common market, which was more an appearance than a reality, but was nonetheless much publicized in the media and caught the imagination of the public, made it difficult to maintain an active opposition to the government's European policy. It looked as if all was going well. European economies were booming, and the Federalists who preached the need for a true political union looked like irritating pessimists. It was also difficult to transfer the experiences of Spinellian militant federalism outside Italy. Francesco Rossolillo can best depict the situation at that time.
In fact, it was a difficult experience, which we usually refer to as our long march in the desert. But it was also a very important time as far as the internal debate and the acquisition of political maturity are concerned. In those years, thanks to the experience accumulated in the Congress of the European People, the Federalists held various demonstrations through which they were able to talk to many tens of thousands of citizens while collecting their signatures. This started in Italy, but progressively extended to other countries of the European community, allowing us to strengthen the bonds with other Federalist organizations. Also in those years, thanks to this action, the Federalists rebuilt their supranational unity through a process that culminated in the two Congresses of Nancy in 1972 and Brussels in 1973. On these occasions, together with other active groups from countries of the community and others, the European Union of Federalists was rebuilt as the true supranational organization of all European Federalist forces.
Che costituisce appunto l'organizzazione sovranazionale di tutte le forze federaliste europee.
The institutional treaties of the community provided for a direct election of the European Parliament, but the governments had nominated an assembly of delegates which was more sensitive to their national policies.
On several occasions, the Federalists had contested such a ghostly assembly, and not only with demonstrations such as the one we can see here.
Between the end of the 60s and the beginning of the 70s, war broke out in the Middle East. The oil crisis and Nixon's decision to discontinue dollar parity made it clear to all that the common market was in jeopardy. At that time, the MFE launched the proposal for a direct election of the European Parliament.
In December 1975, on the eve of the European Summit, the Federalists organized a large popular demonstration in Rome to press for a decision on the European election.
During the summit, chaired by Aldo Moro, participants such as Schmidt, Giscard d'Estaing, Wilson, and others had long arguments. They finally agreed upon the proposal for direct election of the Parliament in spite of Great Britain's opposition.
History's first supranational election, initially scheduled for summer 1978, actually took place in June 1979.
The nearly 4 years preceding the direct election of the European Parliament were a period of intense federalist activity. MFE's goal was that the European elections be coupled with a true European government and a European currency, the sole instrument capable of stabilizing the international economy.
The Federalists won the first allies to their cause. Roy Jenkins, president of the Executive Commission of the EEC, met with the Federalists in Piazza del Duomo in Milan in October of 1978 and congratulated them for their initiative and signed the petition for a European government and currency.
Jenkins first, then Giscard d'Estaing and Schmidt. Towards the end of 1978, several projects came to life for the institution of a common currency, the ECU, European Currency Unit. The resistance of the central banks and of other national centers of power led to a compromise.
The Federalists once again poured into the streets, in Rome and Siena in particular, where on November the 1st, 1978, an Italo-German summit took place. They had cleared the last hurdle. Italy joined the newborn European monetary system.
The ECU is hardly more than an accounting unit. Still, the theme of economical and monetary unity and of a European government vigorously supported by the Federalists would dominate the European debate for the following decade.
June 1979, the vote at last. The elected European Parliament was born. Spinelli accepted an offer to be candidate. He was elected and took the leadership of the Federalist wing of the Parliament. He founded the Crocodile Club and launched the struggle for a treaty that would establish a European Union, a true constituent struggle.
Questo Parlamento non ha però nessun potere.
The Parliament had no power at all. So the only right and fundamental thing it did was to indicate to all the national parliaments and governments that if something serious were to be done, it was necessary to dramatically reform the actual community by creating a union with a true legislative power, a true European government. Creating, in fact, a machine able to decide, where the nation-states would have something to say but could not act independently, something that would negate the whole operation.
After the big success of the 1979 European elections, a debate originated within the EMF, and particularly in its younger section, to focus on the fact that while the direct election of the Parliament draws the European unity nearer, such unity is only a means to reach a higher goal, that is, the federal unity of all mankind. In 1980, when the 10th Congress of MFE convened in Bari, the slogan was European Unity for a United World, and this theme was hotly debated. However, this debate did not keep MFE nor its youth component from fighting to make sure that the elected European Parliament could gain effective legislative powers and actual European unity could be achieved.
Slowly but surely, Spinelli within the Parliament and the Federalists in the towns made sure that the constituent choice prevailed. On the 14th of February 1984, the decisive vote was taken in Strasbourg. 80% of the Parliament sided with Spinelli and approved of the treaty.
On the 25th of May 1984, President Mitterrand of France took a firm position on the treaty. He declared, "Your Assembly invited us to go even further on this path by proposing the project for a treaty that establishes European Union. France is in favor of such an endeavor. Speaking in her name, I declare her ready to examine and defend your project, the inspiration of which she fully shares."
The Milan summit was held. Success seemed at hand, though powerful resistance emerged from nationalist circles to whom the British government gave voice and support. Spring 1985, the foreign ministers met in Stresa, and the young Federalists greeted them with the slogan, "European Union now." While the ministers argued, citizens started mobilizing all over Europe for a big demonstration to take place in Milan in Piazza del Duomo.
The big day came at last. The project for a treaty for a European Union was to be examined by the European Council in Milan on the 28th and 29th of July 1985. Since the MFE Congress in Cagliari and the UEF meeting in Strasbourg, the Federalists in Milan, in Italy, and in Europe had been working hard to face this challenge. Among others, there were 300 young people who paid their own way. They started off from Madrid to be in Milan at dawn on the 29th of June and joined their comrades from all over Europe.
We think that Europe is not only an economical union, but a political one as well.
Europe is a promise which needs to be turned into a reality. That's the reason we're here, to exercise pressure over the representatives of our countries so that they decide to get rid of all social, economical and political individuality and choose unity.
The time for truth had come. Time to see if the European people really would stand by their parliaments, as the Federalists claimed, and if they were ready to take to the streets to demonstrate in favor of a more united and democratic Europe.
The Europeans turned out in force. Despite the unusually hot and humid weather at the end of June, more than 100,000 people demonstrated in the streets, right from the suburbs to the center of Milan. tens of thousands of flags with the green E on them were waving in the Piazza del Duomo, where the European representatives of the federalist forces took turns.
The gentlemen who govern us think that Europe does not interest the people, that the man in the street does not know anything about it. Today, we are determined to prove that it's not true, that the common people and the citizens as a whole do support Europe.
For the first time, a mass of people got together in this square to support a united Europe. We can say this is the first supranational mass demonstration.
La prima manifestazione di massa sovranazionale.
In the meantime, the 10 heads of state and heads of governments reached the Castello Sforzesco, protected by an impressive police display.
The Italian and Benelux governments were vociferously in favor of the treaty. Mrs. Thatcher was strongly against it.
At this time, the MFE president, Mario Albertini, took the floor.
Perché noi avremo la realtà dell'Europa quando il nostro diritto di voto diventerà, come deve essere in democrazia, il diritto di decidere la politica europea. Se la politica europea ristagna, se l'Europa non sa battersi per la pace, se l'Europa non sa battersi per eliminare la disoccupazione, se l'Europa non riesce a ottenere la ripresa economica, se l'Europa non riesce a battersi per l'ecologia e per la nuova società, è perché 10 o 12 capi di governo pretendono di governare l'Europa alle spalle dei cittadini, alle spalle del Parlamento europeo. Non saranno mai capaci di governare l'Europa. Non saranno mai capaci di governare l'Europa. È il regno dell'assurdo. La battaglia comincia adesso. Fino a ora, cari amici, abbiamo avuto l'Europa dei governi, abbiamo avuto l'Europa degli interessi con il mercato comune. Ci era stato sempre detto che questo è il realismo, ci era stato sempre detto che questo è il pragmatismo. Questa Europa dei governi, questa Europa degli interessi non è nemmeno riuscita a fare la moneta europea nonostante i solenni impegni. Questa Europa unita è meno unita dell'Europa del secolo scorso. Nel secolo scorso un libero cittadino passava le frontiere senza mostrare nessun passaporto a nessuno. L'Europa dei governi, l'Europa degli interessi ha mantenuto in piedi le frontiere. Ma voi vedete cosa sta accadendo? Al Castello Sforzesco questo vertice che noi non accettiamo perché noi vogliamo un governo eletto dal popolo, questo vertice non è capace di fare l'unione, ma non è capace nemmeno di disfare l'unione. Da oggi, con l'ingresso in campo del popolo europeo nella lotta per la costruzione dell'Europa, noi sappiamo di avere un grande spazio aperto davanti a noi. Viva il popolo europeo! Viva il Parlamento europeo! Viva gli Stati Uniti d'Europa!
La règle de l'unanimité pour ces conseils européens a été battue en brèche. 7 pays ont décidé de leur côté de convoquer une conférence intergouvernementale pour rédiger un projet d'Union européenne. Il s'agit des 6 pays fondateurs de la CEE et de l'Irlande. Le Danemark, la Grèce et la Grande-Bretagne se sont opposés.
For the first time in the history of the EEC, the unanimity rule had been beaten. But that wasn't enough. During the months that followed, summits were held in Luxembourg and Brussels, where, despite imposing federalist demonstrations, the Union Front dissolved.
The French and German governments supported a compromise position. The Single Act came into being, with a proviso that Mrs. Thatcher could not refuse, to set up a true European single market by 1992.
This at least represented a new opportunity for the Federalists to continue their struggle.
'The the 23rd of May 1986, Altiero Spinelli died. His funeral in Rome gave his old friends from the resistance, such as President Pertini, the opportunity to stand side by side with the Federalists. It was an awkward moment. Nevertheless, Spinelli left a message, as Albertini recalls. Don't give up. The need for Europe is still there, and the Federalists should assume full responsibility for it.
Spinelli had declared in his last public speech at the MFE Central Committee, it is necessary to find new paths to make the European people's voice heard and have them participate in the struggle for the Union.
On the 2nd of March 1989, the 14th MFE Congress opened in Rome, 3 months before the third European election took place in June 1989. 3 years had passed since Spinelli's death. The time had come to evaluate what had been done and what still needed to be done.
The single act and the deadline of 1992 kept the theme of European Union in the spotlight. The Federalists didn't miss the opportunity, and again they mobilized their militants.
Spinelli's last message turned into a new initiative, the call for a referendum on the constituent power of the European Parliament.
Signatures were collected in March. In less than 3 months, 100,000 had signed the petition, thanks to campaigns like the one we see here in Assisi.
On June 20th, the proposed bill was handed over to the Parliament. It required a complicated procedure, and several votes were taken.
The last vote took place at the Senate 5 days before Christmas. Unanimity. The referendum would be held together with the June elections.
Still, the Federalists were worried that the people might be misinformed of the referendum and not go to the polls. They organized popular demonstrations.
The next step was that of transferring the success from the Italian to the European front. April the 15th in Florence. More than 200 young people from different European political organizations met for a convention on the theme of the referendum in Italy. They concentrated on how to obtain the same result, that is, a constituent mandate to the European Parliament. In other countries, possibly with different means.
On the night of June 18th, the polls opened. 88% of the Italians said yes to the constituent mandate.
This success exceeded their highest expectations and showed how Spinelli and the MFE were right again.
The first thing I have to say is that in Italy, 30 million citizens were in favor of granting constituent powers to the European Parliament. It was the biggest demonstration of popular will for a political goal ever in Italy. There's never been such a unanimous consensus of opinion before. This weighed on the Italian government and on the members of the European Parliament elected in Italy. From now on, the Italian government had the duty to fight for the constituent mandate to the Euro Parliament in every circumstance, and for the European Council in particular. The European members of Parliament elected in Italy must also support this mandate.
We're almost up to date. The decade ended with great expectations. After the Italian referendum, the Belgian and German parliaments took important votes in favor of the Constituent Front. So has the French President, François Mitterrand. The European Council of Strasbourg vigorously sped up the pace on economic and monetary union. In the meantime, a new responsibility for the European community is forming. The Stalinist regime has collapsed in Eastern Europe. There is now a call for democratic reform.
There is a real possibility that in the 90s, the two sides of Europe will proceed together towards union and the full realization of international democracy.
we return to Ventotene, 50 years after the arrival of ALTIERO Spinelli and the birth of the Federalist Manifesto.
For 10 days, young people have taken part in the meeting, discussing European and world politics, always trying, according to Spinelli's teaching, to find and iron out the problems, and to take advantage of the options for action offered by history to men of goodwill.
1989 was a special year. The referendum in Italy, the prospect of a European currency, and of an economic and monetary union, to which both Mitterrand and Delors are deeply committed, seemed to duplicate the atmosphere of the 50s, the heroic times of the founding fathers.
Perhaps the struggle for a European Union is drawing to a conclusion at last?
Not by chance did the Federalists in Ventotene dedicate a good part of this year's activities to the world scene and to the possibility of action and collaboration with the world Federalists.
As Kit Pinot and Dieter Heinrich said at the end of the Second World War, the European Federalists and the World Federalists are splitting up to go their separate ways.
Yes, in the early days with the founding of the Federalist movement, there was a split between those people who felt that regional federation should be the first goal and that perhaps world federation was a much larger and much more remote possibility, and so they wanted to work for regional federation directly. Others felt that perhaps regional federations would form competing blocks and that they may in some senses become an obstacle to the ultimate goal of world federation. So there was a split in the movement in the early days.
We are concerned with developing the United Nations along federal principles, giving it the ability to make international law on behalf of the global community, the way European Federalists focus on creating a federation in Europe to do the same thing for Europe.
In the Southern Hemisphere as well, there is expectation for a message of hope, a model to follow.
I came to Ventotene to bring a message of hope from the African continent. The Club d'Afrique has the duty to fight for its ideas on African unity.
One comes to Ventotene to work seriously, but there is some leisure. The moments of amusement and relaxation are useful in order to get to know one another better and create a basis for united action once one is back in one's own city.
I think that many of you will become leaders of the Federalist movement, so we'll be able to meet again in Ventotene.
Despite all expectations, great changes have occurred both in the East and the West. Europe is once again at the forefront of the world scene. What can we expect if European Union becomes a reality?
You must think that European unity is a grandiose historical step forward. Europe is the first example of international democracy, and it's the first real assertion of internationalism. It means a new way to see the relations between nations, not based on strength and violence, but upon right and law. And Europe can turn into a model that can solve not only European problems, but the world's problems as well. With perestroika and the democratic process that started in the Soviet Union and in Central Europe, the forces of renewal were freed, but also those of nationalism as well. The old prejudices are back and could undermine the positive influence of perestroika. Well, the federal model of the European community and the peace between France and Germany are necessary to the solution of Russia's internal problems and to the new organization of the people of Central Europe. This is also true for Africa, and it's true for Latin America. And of course, it's true on a world level as far as the superpowers are concerned. That's where we stand. Europe becomes a model to solve the world's problems. This is the meaning of European construction. And so we mustn't expect a significant change in our everyday lives. But with European unity, the Europeans will start to be citizens of the world. European citizens, world citizens. And that's what really matters.
Il 10 giugno, per la prima volta nella storia, 180 milioni di europei di 9 paesi eleggeranno insieme il Parlamento Europeo.
4 Tage im Juni 1979. Zum ersten Mal schreiten die Bürger der damals 9 Mitgliedstaaten der Europäischen Gemeinschaft zu den Urnen, um direkt abzustimmen über das Europäische Parlament. Was 1958 als rein konsultative Körperschaft der Europäischen Gemeinschaften begann, hat sich nach und nach mehr Einfluss erarbeitet. Die erste Sitzung findet in Räumen statt, die vom Europarat angemietet wurden.
When we arrived here, there were no buildings belonging to the Parliament in Brussels at all. We had to borrow things from the Economic and Social Committee and camp here and there. And we had to go in plenaries to Strasbourg and to Luxembourg. I remember initially we had 4 members had to share one typewriter.
Bis 1979 waren die Europaabgeordneten von den nationalen Parlamenten entsandt worden. Erst die Direktwahl verschaffte dem Europaparlament die nötige Legitimation, um den beiden anderen großen EG-Institutionen weitere Zuständigkeiten abzutrotzen. Dazu kommt, dass das neu gewählte Parlament gespickt ist mit Symbolfiguren der europäischen Einigung.
I see Louise Weiss, who was the first doyen d'âge who made the first speech in 1979, a very distinguished lady who had a long political career in France and was full of history herself. And then we elected Simone Veil as the first president of the parliament in that first session in Strasbourg in July 1979. There was ALTIERO Spinelli, who was a member, of course, in the first parliament. So it brings back memories of great figures who it was a privilege to work with.
Die neue Legitimität sollte dem Parlament in den folgenden Jahren dazu dienen, sich nach und nach mehr Einfluss zu erarbeiten.
1979 hatte das Parlament überhaupt keine Gesetzgebungsrechte. Heute sind wir gleichberechtigter Gesetzgeber in fast allen Fragen europäischer Gesetzgebung. Es ist eine großartige, wunderbare Entwicklung und die Arbeit hat sich sehr gelohnt.
Doch bis es soweit war, mussten sich die Parlamentarier, viele von ihnen Parlamentsneulinge, erst einmal in ihre neue Rolle einfinden.
1979 war es so, dass, weil das Parlament noch kaum Kompetenzen hatte, der Umgang miteinander auch sehr locker, sehr leger war.
Eventually we settled down at a table and there was a young German colleague who settled down. He didn't know anybody either. And so my first friend in the parliament from another nationality was Hans-Gert Pöttering, who was the young German. And he and I are the only 2 remaining in the parliament now who were elected in 1979.
Maria Nedelcheva ist eine junge Abgeordnete aus Bulgarien. Als zum ersten Mal das Europäische Parlament gewählt wurde, war sie 3 Wochen alt.
Évidemment, on a beaucoup de respect par rapport à ceux qui étaient là déjà en 79, qui ont continué. On ne peut qu'avoir d'admiration pour eux parce qu'on voit tout le travail qu'ils ont fait et qu'ils sont toujours là, qu'ils ont gardé leur dynamisme et leur foi en l'idée européenne. Ça ne peut que renforcer nos idées à nous et ma vision à moi.
Der Enthusiasmus der ersten Tage scheint also noch nicht gebrochen zu sein.
Anche a Bruxelles tutte le strade portano a Roma. L'Italia, uno dei paesi fondatori dell'Europa, è stata protagonista degli eventi europei più importanti. Il trattato da cui ha origine la Comunità Economica Europea fu ratificato nella capitale italiana nel 1957, gettando le basi dell'Unione Europea. Il radicale italiano Altiero Spinelli, padre fondatore dell'integrazione europea, ha lasciato impresso il suo ricordo.
He lectured me on how the responsibility was now falling on me and my generation to take forward the campaign to deepen integration.
Sebbene tutte le strade portino a Roma, l'Italia aveva bisogno dell'Europa e l'Europa dell'Italia.
Costruire una democrazia stabile era solamente possibile in questo quadro europeo e penso che per questo gli italiani sono stati molto attivi, hanno investito nell'Europa.
Ma la stella italiana brilla sempre meno in Europa.
I'm afraid that Italy lost a lot of reputation, especially connected with all the scandals related with Berlusconi. Italy is, in the eyes of many European politicians, not seen as a strong and credible partner.
Ma quali sono i personaggi e gli eventi che hanno determinato il ruolo dell'Italia nella storia europea?
Julius Caesar.
Romano Prodi.
Il referendum nel 1946, scegliendo la Repubblica e la democrazia, è stato il momento decisivo nel quale l'Italia ha scelto l'Europa e un'Europa démocratique.
Salut, bienvenue dans Eureka, pour une petite série de portraits ringards, sur les stars qui ont lancé la construction européenne. Les plus connus, le français Robert Schuman et Jean Monnet, l'italien Alcide De Gasperi, le belge Paul-Henri Spaak et l'allemand Konrad Adenauer. Ce sont les fameux pères fondateurs, tous des têtes et des sacrés caractères. Mais avant de vous faire leur portrait, je voudrais vous présenter un grand penseur, un des plus célèbres députés européens. C'est l'italien Altiero Spinelli.
39-45, l'Europe est déchirée par la Deuxième Guerre mondiale. La durée du conflit et l'intensité des bombardements la mettent en ruine. Et face au désastre, plusieurs hommes politiques cherchent à créer un modèle de paix durable. Mais pour ça, il faut revoir l'organisation des pays européens en profondeur. En 1941, Altiero Spinelli est un des premiers à rêver d'une Europe unie. Ce jeune journaliste italien est un antifasciste. Il s'oppose au pouvoir autoritaire qui dirige l'Italie. En prison, il écrit un manifeste pour une Europe libre et unie. Son idée, pour éviter la guerre, il faut rassembler les pays européens en un seul État fédéral. Pour ça, les pays devraient confier leur indépendance à une organisation placée au-dessus d'eux. À la fin de la guerre, les mouvements pour la paix se multiplient et l'idée d'un fédéralisme européen devient de plus en plus populaire. En 1946, l'Union des fédéralistes européens est créée. Spinelli est un de ses animateurs. Il est convaincu qu'il faut une constitution commune pour organiser et faire fonctionner l'Europe politique. Un projet auquel il va consacrer toute son énergie. Son projet va inspirer d'autres initiatives, et en 1948, c'est la naissance du mouvement européen. Robert Schuman, Alcide De Gasperi, Paul-Henri Spaak, Konrad Adenauer en font partie. Ce sont eux qui lanceront la construction européenne quelques années plus tard, mais ils choisiront l'économie et pas la politique comme trait d'union.
L'idée d'Europe politique ne va plus lâcher Altiero Spinelli. Dans les années 70, il est membre de la Commission européenne et aussi du Parlement européen. Ce grand barbu va travailler dur pour renforcer l'union entre les pays européens. Pour convaincre ses collègues députés, Spinelli crée le Club du Crocodile. C'est le nom d'un célèbre restaurant à Strasbourg, en France. Il anime les réunions de ce club avec de plus en plus de députés. Son but n'a pas changé. Il veut toujours créer une union fédérale et aussi renforcer le pouvoir du Parlement et de la Commission dans toutes les décisions sur l'avenir de l'Europe.
1984, Spinelli dépose au Parlement un texte pour créer l'Union européenne. Il veut donner un véritable élan à la construction d'une Europe politique. Pour lui, il s'agit d'une aventure qui ressemble à celle du vieil homme et la mer.
Monsieur le Président, vous connaissez tous le petit roman de Hemingway où il parle d'un vieux pêcheur qui pêche le plus grand poisson de sa vie et puis il tâche de le porter vers son port, mais les requins peu à peu le dévorent de manière qu'il arrive avec une arête seulement. Alors, Monsieur le Président, le Parlement, par le vote qu'il va donner dans quelques minutes, aura pris le plus grand poisson de sa vie. Et il doit le porter encore dans le port. Mais faisons bien attention, parce que des requins seront à tout moment là pour tâcher de le dévorer. Tâchons de ne pas arriver seulement avec une arête.
Le gros poisson, le plan Spinelli, a du succès chez les parlementaires. Ce grand texte est adopté à une large majorité en février 1984. Mais sur son chemin, il va rencontrer un requin. Le Conseil, qui représente les intérêts des pays membres, ne l'approuve pas. Les pays ne veulent pas céder leur pouvoir politique à l'Union européenne, mais de belles arêtes vont quand même arriver au port.
Il faudra attendre 2004 pour que la Constitution européenne soit signée par les chefs d'État. Mais en 2005, elle sera rejetée par les citoyens français et néerlandais. Cependant, on retrouvera les idées d'Altiero Spinelli dans les futurs grands textes de l'Union européenne, comme le traité de Lisbonne par exemple. Et les pouvoirs du Parlement se sont renforcés, mais pas autant qu'il l'avait imaginé.
Et pour la petite histoire, une des ailes du Parlement européen à Bruxelles porte aussi son nom. Salut!
Le moine, Lemien.
Finally, it was a roll call vote, with each member responding to his name. Some, like Mr. Dodds-Parker, jokingly gave their yes or no in someone else's language.
Dodds-Parker.
Then the final count. It was an overwhelming 107 for direct elections, 2 against, with 17 abstentions. and thanks for all the help during all these years.
Très bien.
Goed gedaan. Dankjewel. Jij ook. Hè? Goed zo. All right.
Il 10 giugno, per la prima volta nella storia, 180 milioni di europei di 9 paesi eleggeranno insieme il Parlamento Europeo. Dai il tuo voto per la tua Europa.
All'onorevole Altiero Spinelli, noto come il padre del progetto dell'Unione Europea.
Je passe au rapport de M. Spinelli au nom de la Commission institutionnelle sur l'avant-projet de traité instituant l'Union européenne. La parole est au rapporteur.
Les affaires d'intérêt commun ne peuvent être valablement gérées que par un pouvoir véritablement commun. Je considère que si les idées qui sont contenues dans ce texte de projet et résolution qui sont ici n'avaient pas existé dans l'esprit de la grande majorité de ce Parlement, je n'aurais jamais réussi à l'y mettre. Je n'ai qu'exercé comme Socrate l'art maïeutique. J'ai été la sage femme qui a été ce Parlement à enfanter cet enfant. À présent, il faut le faire vivre. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur le rapporteur. Le vote est ouvert sur l'ensemble de la résolution. Tout le monde a voté. Résultat du vote, votant 292, pour 226, contre 32, abstention 34. Mes félicitations à la Commission institutionnelle et à son rapporteur, M. Spinelli.
Other two figures who are enormously important are Jean Monnet. Jean Monnet, he spent the war years in Washington organising, he was an organiser, a technocrat, and he said, okay, fine. And I think the idea of this supra-state body, which became the higher authority, was very much down to him. And he said, okay, we've got to organise it, let's do it, that's the way it has to be done. And the other figure, who I think shouldn't be underestimated, although he tends to be written out of the mainstream story, is ALTIERO Spinelli. Spinelli was very left-wing, and he was an utterly convinced federalist. The only way in which Europe was actually worth having was as a federal Europe. He was a member of Europe. He was a commissioner at one time, certainly a member of the European Parliament, was a communist, but actually, certainly was on the left, but I would say he was a federalist. I think that was the thing that drove him. And so that's the second key moment. The next key moment, which I will
Il faut vaincre ces préjugés. Ce que je vous demande là est presque impossible, car il faut vaincre notre histoire. Et pourtant, si on ne la vainc pas, il faut savoir qu'une règle s'imposera, mesdames et messieurs. Le nationalisme, c'est la guerre.
Ich habe vorgeschlagen, dass wir einen Europäischen Sicherheitsrat einsetzen mit wechselnden, rotierenden Besetzungen der Mitgliedstaaten, in dem wichtige Beschlüsse schneller vorbereitet werden können. Und wir müssen eine europäische Eingreiftruppe schaffen, mit der Europa auch am Ort des Geschehens handeln kann. Wir haben große Fortschritte bei der strukturierten Zusammenarbeit im militärischen Bereich erreicht. Das ist gut und wird ja auch hier weitestgehend unterstützt. Aber wir sollten, das sage ich sehr bewusst auch aus der Entwicklung der letzten Jahre, wir sollten an der Vision arbeiten, eines Tages auch eine echte europäische Armee zu schaffen. Jean-Claude Juncker. Ja,
Non sapevo che ci fossero dei lupi in quest'Aula.
Denn Jean-Claude Juncker hat schon vor 4 Jahren gesagt, eine gemeinsame europäische Armee würde der Welt zeigen, dass es zwischen den europäischen Ländern nie wieder Krieg gibt. Und das ist ja keine Armee gegen die NATO. Ich bitte Sie. Sondern es kann eine gute Ergänzung der NATO sein. Kein Mensch möchte klassische Verbindungen in Frage stellen, aber liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, es wäre doch viel einfacher, mit uns zusammenzuarbeiten, wenn wir heute über 160 Verteidigungssysteme haben, Waffensysteme haben. Und die Vereinigten Staaten von Amerika nur 50 oder 60. Wenn wir für alles selbstständige Verwaltung, Betreuung, Ausbildung brauchen, dann sind wir doch kein effizienter Partner. Und wenn wir unser Geld effizient einsetzen wollen und doch für gleiche Ziele kämpfen, dann können wir doch in der NATO mit einer europäischen Armee gemeinsam auftreten. Das sehe ich überhaupt keinen Widerspruch. Und das schließt dann natürlich, schauen Sie, ich bin da, ich freue mich dran. Ich lasse mich doch nicht irritieren, ich komme auch aus dem Parlament. Also, gemeinsame
Mr. President, honourable members of this House, ladies and gentlemen, later this month in Rome, 27 of our member states will stand shoulder to shoulder in peace, solidarity and friendship to mark the 60th anniversary of the Treaties of Rome, and I would like to see the President of the Parliament being associated to these ceremonies. However, this will not simply be a birthday celebration. It should also be the birth moment of the European Union at 27. And as we turn the page and commence a new chapter in our history, it is time we sought new answers to a question as old as our Union is young. Quo vadis Europa at 27? Europe's founding fathers were visionaries. Spinelli and Rossi, imprisoned by a fascist regime, dared to dream of a place where allies and adversaries would unite. Unable to speak freely, they penned a manifesto for a free and united Europe, which had to be circulated secretly in Rome among the Italian resistance movement in 1943. Writing this manifesto, this new chapter, Spinelli and Rossi decided not to cling to the darkness surrounding them in their Ventotene prison cells. They stretched out their arms to the light instead. They dreamed of a better future and paved the way towards it. 60 years later, this should be an inspiration for us. With nothing to dim our voices, we'll be forgiven for not speaking up. In 60 years' time, what will our grandchildren say of our legacy? I want them to be proud, as Spinelli and Rossi probably would have been today. Now is our time to be pioneers and carve out a vision so that we may walk hand in hand, united at 27, towards our future.
Cari ragazzi e care ragazze, la sfida che abbiamo davanti è una sfida importante, anzi noi abbiamo davanti tante sfide, ma non dobbiamo scoraggiarci. Tocca a noi rilanciare il progetto europeo con nuova determinazione, la stessa determinazione che troviamo nella frase che conclude il manifesto di Ventotene. La via da percorrere non è facile né sicura, ma deve essere percorsa e lo sarà. Vi ringrazio.
Grazie alla Presidente della Camera Laura Boldrini.
Scrivevano Spinelli e i suoi compagni, la via da percorrere non è facile, non è sicura, ma deve essere percorsa.
European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker has opened a series of exhibitions in Karl Marx's hometown of Trier. They include a huge bronze statue of Marx donated by China. It's to be officially unveiled on Saturday, the 200th anniversary of the birth of the philosopher. The sculpture of Marx has proved somewhat controversial, but Jean-Claude Juncker spoke in positive terms about him. Karl Marx, he said, was a philosopher who thought into the future, had creative aspirations, and today he stands for things which he is not responsible for and which he didn't cause, because many of the things he wrote down were redrafted into the opposite.
Quasi in ihr Gegenteil umformuliert wurde.
The huge bronze figure is mounted on a pedestal directly in front of the former Marx family home. Chinese President Xi Jinping also praised him. Marx, he said, is the mentor of the revolution of the proletariat and working people all over the world, the founder of Marxist political parties and the creator of international communism, and the greatest thinker of modern times. Politicians in Trier say they're not glorifying Marx, but say he was a significant figure in the town, and they encourage people to discuss his philosophies. Marx spent 17 years of his life in the town.
Thank you, Mr. President, Vice President, Council. I would say, having listened carefully to this debate, I would say I'm proud to be part of this report working structures and team in this House. And that means that I remind all of us, all you, that the founding document of the integration process was and is a manifesto of Ventotene. When it had been written in the darkest times of the European history, when Spinelli and others have thought about the question how we are organizing a coexisting, a co-living in friendship, in peace of citizens who shot each other. And I think we should always remind this anti-fascist founding consensus of the European integration process. And yes, today we have to face that the change of treaties is necessary. The reality, you have described it from the various points, that the social reality is under danger because there are neoliberal policies which are worrying the citizens in a lot of member states. And
But we know we will need more, a lot more, because this will be a long haul and the world of tomorrow will look very different than that of yesterday. Honorable members, I am convinced that Europe can shape this new world if it works together and rediscovers its pioneering spirit. And for this, I want to cite a sentence from the Ventotene Manifesto, written by two of Italy's and Europe's greatest visionaries, Ernesto Rossi and ALTIERO Spinelli, one of our founding fathers, writing from their prison on a remote island at the height of the war, when all hope of a united Europe seemed lost. They gave us these words of confidence. The moment has arrived in which we must know how to discard old burdens, how to be ready for the new world that is coming, that will be so different from what we have imagined. Dear friends, this moment has arrived once again. The moment to put behind us the old divisions, disputes, and recriminations, to come out of our entrenched positions. The moment to be ready for that new world, to use all the power and our common spirit and the strength of our shared purposes. The starting point for this must be making our economies, societies, and way of life more sustainable and resilient. Find the answers in this new world will require courage, trust, and solidarity. And it will need massive investment to jumpstart our economies. We need a Marshall Plan for Europe's recovery, and it needs to be put in place immediately. There's only one instrument we have that is trusted by all member states, which is already in place, that can deliver quickly, it is transparent, and it is time-tested as an instrument for cohesion, convergence, and investment. And that is the European budget. The European budget will be the mothership of our recovery. And for that reason, the next 7-year budget must be different to what we have imagined, just as Spinelli said. We will use the power of the whole European budget
Tutaj któryś z panów wspomniał o roli Trybunału Konstytucyjnego, o tym, czy Trybunał nie mógłby tutaj dokonać pewnej analizy tychże postanowień. Oczywiście jest już orzeczenie wspomniane przez pana profesora Chruściaka i tam, no nie da się ukryć, jest wskazana zmiana konstytucji jako sposób usunięcia tychże sprzeczności, tylko też jeżeli mówimy o tym w duchu nadrzędności konstytucji, prymatu konstytucji nad traktatami, to właściwie należałoby podjąć działania prawne zmierzające do zmiany traktatów, bo jeżeli dostosowujemy konstytucję do treści w traktatach, to trudno przyjąć tak racjonalnie, że uznajemy jej prymat w każdej sferze. Przy czym do tego orzeczenia pojawiły się oczywiście głosy i tutaj między innymi glosatorzy również wypowiadają się w tym duchu, że prawo wspólnotowe nie przeczy prymatowi obowiązywania, ma natomiast prymat stosowania. I tu przepraszam pana przewodniczącego, ale sądy w Polsce już tak robią i będą tak robiły, bo jest to ich zadaniem. W sytuacji, kiedy może dojść do sprzeczności pomiędzy sferą, w której wspólnota uzyskała kompetencje do działania na zasadzie kompetencji powierzonych, a więc powierzonych wolą suwerena. Także też nie wiązałabym tego z utratą suwerenności. Nie będą miały oporów przed zastosowaniem prawa wspólnotowego, nawet w sytuacji, kiedy będzie to norma sprzeczna z konstytucją. A sama zmiana konstytucji, jeśli jeszcze króciutko mogę, oczywiście jest sposobem na usunięcie tychże niezgodności. O tym także pokazuje, a w ogóle bardzo ciekawie pokazuje pewną taką obronę zakresu jurysdykcji sądów konstytucyjnych, bo też trudno tutaj ganić Trybunał za takie, a nie inne orzeczenie, ale także sądów konstytucyjnych Niemiec, Francji i kolejnych, że tak powiem, dalszych orzeczeń Europejskiego Trybunału Sprawiedliwości, gdzie powstały wątpliwości natury konstytucyjnej, a Trybunał też wskazuje wyraźnie w swoich orzeczeniach na wspólne wartości konstytucyjne państw członkowskich. To dziękuję.
Bardzo dziękuję. Bardzo proszę, pan doktor.
Proszę Państwa, zebraliśmy się tutaj w historycznym momencie, ponieważ za 7 godzin, 7,5 godziny powstanie w Europie nowe państwo, nowe cesarstwo europejskie pod nazwą Unia Europejska i Polska stanie się częścią składową tego państwa. W tym momencie trzeba postawić sobie pytanie, czy Polska będzie państwem niepodległym, czy niepodległość utraci. Doświadczenie historyczne poucza nas, że nigdy w historii żadna część składowa jakiegokolwiek państwa nie była niepodległa. Przeciwnie, zawsze podlegała władzom tego państwa jako jego część składowa. Wynika z tego, że jesteśmy na 7 godzin przed rezygnacją z niepodległości państwowej. Jest to historyczny moment, bo wyjątkowy nawet, dlatego że dotychczas niepodległość państwowa była nam odbierana przez różne rodzaje przemocy zewnętrznej. Dzisiaj niepodległość państwowa jest nam odbierana, czy jesteśmy jej pozbawiani niejako na własne życzenie, dlatego że 8 czerwca 2003 roku w referendum akcesyjnym większość tych, którzy poszli głosować w tym referendum, zdecydowała o tym, żeby z tej niepodległości się zrzec. Ku radości tych, którzy piastują zewnętrzne znamiona władzy III Rzeczypospolitej. Dlaczego się z tego tak cieszą? No, widać wyraźnie, że z tą niepodległością sobie nie radzą, że z tą niepodległością mają same zgryzoty i chętnie się tego pozbędą, licząc na to, że Unia Europejska zapewni im bezpieczeństwo przed nami, dlatego że obawiają się i słusznie być może, że jeśli my się zorientujemy, cośmy utracili, to będziemy chcieli im jakoś wymierzyć za to sprawiedliwość. Liczą na to, że tam się schowają. Być może, że liczą słusznie. Proszę Państwa, dzisiaj jest jeszcze z drugiego powodu historyczny moment. 179 lat temu rozpoczęło się powstanie listopadowe. Był pierwszy dzień powstania listopadowego, bo powstanie się rozpoczęło w nocy z 29 na 30 listopada, kiedy to zdesperowani podchorążowie, młodzi ludzie, bez żadnej politycznej kalkulacji zaczęli walkę o odzyskanie niepodległości. Tak jak potrafili, jak powiadam, bez żadnej politycznej kalkulacji, być może nawet przez kogoś podburzeni, wszczęli walkę o odzyskanie niepodległości. I ta 179. rocznica poucza nas, jak ważną stratą, jak dotkliwą stratą jest utrata niepodległości. Być może, że następne pokolenie za 30 lat, w następnym pokoleniu, w którym odrodzi się tradycja romantyczna, będzie musiało sobie krwi upuścić, żeby podjąć próbę odzyskania tego, z czego dzisiaj rezygnujemy. Bardzo możliwe, że już się nie odrodzi ta tradycja romantyczna. No to wtedy utracimy tę niepodległość na zawsze, być może na długo, bo nigdy żadne imperia w historii nie trwają wiecznie. Każde imperium kiedyś powstaje i kiedyś się kończy, ale być może, że ta tradycja romantyczna, być może, że to pragnienie niepodległości odrodzi się w następnym pokoleniu. I to następne pokolenie na pewno nas wspomni ten moment dziejowy, w którym dzisiaj jesteśmy, z okazji którego żeśmy się zebrali, no i nas osądzi naszą generację, że bez strzału żeśmy się na to zgodzili, bez protestu żeśmy się na to zgodzili. No i tu jesteśmy, ta garstka, która się nas zebrała, próbuje ratować honor, pamięć naszej generacji przed tymi przyszłymi pokoleniami, które będą musiały własną krwią zapłacić za to, z czego dzisiaj tak lekkomyślnie rezygnujemy. Dziękuję bardzo.
ночи война началась, бросай свое дело, поход собирайся, смело мы бой пойдем, давай совета, и как один умрем, в борьбе за это, смело мы бой пойдем, давай совета, и как один умрем, в борьбе за это. Рвутся снаряды, трещат пулеметы, но их не боятся красные роты. Смело мы в бой пойдем, давай совета, и как один умрем, в борьбе за это. Смело мы в бой пойдем, давай совета, и как один умрем, в борьбе за это. Вот показались белые цепи, с ними мы будем биться до смерти. Смело мы в бой пойдем, давай совета, и как один умрем, в борьбе за это. Вечная память павшим героям, вечная